Imagine the grand halls of the Forbidden City draped in white mourning silk, the air thick with incense and the low wail of eunuchs chanting prayers for the departed son of heaven. The emperor lies cold on his dragon bed, his reign over. But for the hundreds of concubines who once danced in his private chambers, laughed at his jokes, and bore his children, this is not the end of their story. It is the beginning of a far darker chapter. What really happened to the emperor's concubines when he died? History books gloss over it with polite silence, but the truth is a tale of ritual sacrifice, political power plays, and lives shattered in the name of loyalty. Today, we're pulling back the veil on one of Imperial China's most haunting secrets: the fate of these women who lived as jewels in the emperor's crown, only to face oblivion when that crown fell. To understand their tragedy, we must travel back to the very roots of Chinese imperial tradition, a practice known as xuanzang, accompanying burial. For centuries, emperors believed their divine rule extended into the afterlife, where they would need servants, guards, and yes, the intimate company of their concubines to maintain their heavenly court. These women weren't just lovers. They were status symbols, political pawns, and, in death, eternal attendants. The idea wasn't born in some isolated moment of madness. It echoed through dynasties, fueled by ancient beliefs that the dead required a full household to thrive in the spirit world. Archaeologists have uncovered chilling evidence. Mass burial pits filled with the skeletons of young women, arranged neatly around their lord's tomb, their bodies bearing marks of ritual execution. But how did this unfold for the emperor's most intimate companions? Let's step into the timeline and see the evolution that turned devotion into doom. It all traces back to the earliest dynasties, like the Shang around 1600 BCE, where royal tombs at sites such as Hujiazwang revealed over 160 skeletons, courtiers, servants, and likely concubines, slaughtered to serve their kings forever. By the time of the Qin dynasty in 221 BCE, the first emperor, Qin Shi Huang, took this to terrifying new heights. His massive mausoleum, guarded by the famous terracotta army, wasn't just clay soldiers. Historical records from the grand historian Sima Qian describe how, after the emperor's death, his son and successor, Qin Ershi, issued a brutal decree. All childless concubines of the late emperor, dozens, perhaps hundreds, were rounded up, executed, and buried alongside him. Why? Because it was inappropriate to let them leave the palace. According to the chronicles, these women, who had once basked in the emperor's favor, were now deemed expendable without heirs to anchor them. Some were sealed alive in the tomb's chambers, left to suffocate in the darkness as the massive stone doors slammed shut. Excavations later revealed small tombs near the site containing the bones of young women, silent proof of this calculated cruelty. It wasn't random. It was a system designed to ensure no secrets escaped and no rivals could claim the emperor's former possessions. As dynasties shifted, so did the horrors, but never fully. The Han dynasty, which followed the Qin, saw some pushback from Confucian scholars and emperors who viewed xuanzang as wasteful and inhumane. Emperor Wu and later Emperor Xian took steps to curb casual killings of servants and maids, even stripping titles from nobles who tried to enforce it. Yet the practice lingered in the shadows for favored concubines, especially those without sons or those the emperor had declared too precious to part with in life. Records hint at selective sacrifices, but the full-scale bloodbaths of the Qin era began to fade into something quieter. Seclusion rather than slaughter. Still, the fear remained. A concubine hearing of her emperor's illness knew her life hung in the balance, not just from palace intrigue, but from the very tradition that had elevated her. Fast forward to the Ming dynasty, and the nightmare reignited with shocking ferocity. The founder, Hangu Emperor Zhu Yuanzhang, revived xuanzang in full force upon his death in 1398. Historical accounts tell of around 40 to 46 concubines forced to follow him into the afterlife. These women were led to a special hall, handed silken cords, and compelled to hang themselves in a grim ritual. Some stood on wooden platforms or beds. Once the nooses were secure, the supports were yanked away, their bodies left dangling as a final act of loyalty. Others were immolated, burned alive, and their ashes buried in separate tombs near the emperor's mausoleum, or in rare cases, entombed standing upright, awaiting his arrival in the spirit realm. The practice didn't stop there. His successor, the Yongle Emperor, took 16 more concubines with him in 1424, including high-ranking consorts like Gong Xianxian, who had once wielded influence in the court. Across the first 5 Ming emperors, historians estimate nearly 100 imperial concubines met this fate. Executed by eunuchs, poisoned, or buried alive, their bodies showing signs of struggle in some archaeological finds from Ming tombs. One chilling detail from the era. These women were often given a final feast, a twisted farewell before the ropes tightened. The Hanggu Emperor's own paranoia and jealousy drove this revival. He wanted control over his harem even beyond the grave, ensuring no one else could claim what was his. But not every concubine faced the same end. Rank and circumstance mattered immensely. Those who had borne sons to the emperor often fared better. They could transition into dowager status, living with their children's households under the protection of their new imperial roles. Childless ones, however, were the most vulnerable, stripped of value in the eyes of the court. And for the unluckiest favorites, the emperor's dying wish sometimes explicitly named them as companions in death, turning personal affection into a death sentence. The turning point came in 1464, with the death of the Zhengtong Emperor, also known as Ingzong or Tianshun. In a remarkable act of reform on his deathbed, he issued a final edict abolishing Xuanzang entirely for imperial concubines and palace maids. He called the practice uncivilized, a stark break from centuries of tradition. His successors honored it, and the mass sacrifices ended. No longer would women be dragged to the tomb. Instead, the system shifted to isolation. Concubines were confined to secluded quarters deep within the palace walls. Their names erased from daily conversations, their movements restricted as if they too had died. Some were sent to Buddhist nunneries to spend their days praying for the emperor's soul. Others guarded his mausoleum as caretakers, living out quiet, regimented lives in the shadow of his eternal resting place. A few childless ones were even released to return home to their families, though the stigma of palace life often left them as outcasts. This evolution continued into the Qing dynasty, where early Manchu rulers dabbled in similar sacrifices. Over 30 concubines were reportedly killed after the Xuanji emperor's death. But by 1673, the Kangxi emperor, advised by his ministers who deemed it cruel and unjust, formally prohibited Xuanzang. From then on, the fate of concubines became one of standardized seclusion. Lifelong confinement in the palace, stripped of influence, or integration into their sons' lives if they had them. Widowed concubines gained some protections against forced remarriage, reflecting a slow cultural shift toward Confucian ideals of mercy and order. So what really happened? The answer isn't a single horror story but a grim tapestry woven across 2,000 years. In the brutal early eras and the Ming revival, it was death, swift, ritualized, and merciless, for dozens upon dozens of women, their bodies interred to serve a dead man's ego. Archaeological digs and ancient texts like the records of the Grand Historian paint a vivid, unflinching picture. Young women sealed in darkness, hanging from silk nooses, or burned to ash. Yet as dynasties progressed and morality evolved, it softened into a different kind of prison. Endless isolation, forgotten in the palace's forgotten corners, or quiet devotion in nunneries and tomb shrines. Some found a sliver of peace with their children. Most simply vanished from history's pages, their voices silenced forever. This wasn't just about superstition or afterlife logistics. It was about power. Emperors wielded absolute control over these women in life, and Xuanzang extended that dominion into eternity. Concubines were chosen for beauty, talent, and political alliances, plucked from families across the empire in massive selection ceremonies. But when the emperor breathed his last, they became liabilities, potential rivals, bearers of secrets, or symbols of the old regime. Their tragedy reminds us how deeply patriarchal systems objectified women, turning human lives into tools for legacy and loyalty. As we close this chapter, picture those concubines one last time, not as footnotes in imperial lore, but as real women with dreams, fears, and families. Their stories, buried with their emperors, deserve to be unearthed. What really happened reveals more than ancient cruelty. It exposes the fragile line between devotion and destruction in one of history's greatest empires. If this glimpse into the Forbidden City's hidden horrors moved you, hit that like button, subscribe for more untold histories, and drop a comment. Which dynasty's practices shocked you the most? Until next time, keep questioning the stories history tries to hide.